Hello and welcome to this, what is in effect our first live stream event of this run of Caring for Vulnerable Children. So I'll actually start with an apology, and that's the fact that we didn't manage to do the live stream event that we had scheduled at the end of week two. So apologies for that. We ran into some technical issues, but we're here now and broadcasting today, and then we'll have a second live stream event at the end of week six at the conclusion of the course. So welcome, thanks for joining the session. And so if you're joining in live time, then that's great, but obviously a lot of you access this after the fact on the YouTube link. So whether you're watching in real time or it's been recorded, thanks for joining us. I'm guessing if you're watching this, you're already into week four, you'll know who I am, but it's always nice to start with an introduction. So my name is Graham McPhee. I'm the lead educator on Care for Vulnerable Children. I'm based here at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland, based in the School of Social Work and Social Policy. So what I'm planning to do over the next kind of 35 minutes or so is have a bit of a chat and respond to some of the questions and some of the posts that have appeared in the various steps and items on the course over the first 4 weeks of its run. This has been another kind of great run of Caring for Vulnerable Children. This is on to our 10th run of the programme, and as always, there's lots of interesting and stimulating debate going on in the comments and the chat. Lots of different perspectives being offered. Obviously, what I can't hope to do is cover everything in the next 35 minutes or so. So I've picked out a couple of things, probably largely focusing on material in weeks 3 and weeks 4. And kind of some of the topics that have been presented there, some of the comments that have come up, and just taking the chance to respond to a couple of things. Now, just because I'm responding here, that doesn't need to say that has to be the end of the conversation. And what we'd encourage people to do is in the comments on the live stream page, on the Care for Vulnerable Children site, then you can post further comments there. So I'm sure what I'll be saying during the course of this session, some people might, I hope there's some stuff that some people will agree with, but equally there'll be other stuff that other people I've got more questions about, a different take on, and I'd be interested to hear and read your responses. So please feel free to continue the conversation and contribute with comments on the page afterwards. So let's jump in. So I started with, I've pulled out a couple of direct questions that have been posted in anticipation of the live stream event. So the first one was posted by Tim in anticipation of today's live stream event. So Tim, thanks for your post and your question. So Tim asks, do you think orphan children would be more likely to form permanent attachments in a kinship care family or in residential care? And if the children were asked, do you think the majority would prefer to be cared for in a kinship caring setting or in residential care? So I'm going to respond to the second part first, Tim, in relation to the preference of children. Now, you use the phrase the majority. I'm not going to, I don't necessarily have kind of statistics to hand as such, but what I am going to kind of cite is a couple of different pieces of research that have been carried out, largely in a Scottish and a UK perspective, speaking to young people who either are or have been within the care system and have experienced either a combination of residential childcare, foster care, kinship care, or other alternative caring arrangements. And as can be the case, and this is something I'm going to talk about a wee bit further in the session as well, when we think specifically about residential childcare, is that sometimes there can be views put forward that family type placements, be that foster care, kinship care, are always the best or the preferred option for children and young people. And we know from the research that is definitely not the case. Now, I'm not sitting saying it's a majority one way or the other, but we know that from the research, young people tell us different stories. And for some young people, yes, being in a family type setting, be that a foster care placement or a kinship care placement is very much the preferred option. But equally, there are some young people who talk about residential childcare being their preferred option. And one of the kind of common stories or narratives we hear from some of those young people is that being in residential childcare is it's in some way kind of easier for them, and they feel almost kind of less guilty. Some young people, despite the fact that whatever's going on at home that has caused them not to be living at home and to have alternative living arrangements, they've still obviously got your family's still your family, and in terms of those connections and those relationships and all the feelings and the emotions that are tied in with that. And for some young people, going to live with another family, an alternative family, be that foster carers or kinship care, can challenge some young people in terms of them having feelings of guilt in some way about the fact that I should be living with my own family rather than this other alternative family. So some young people will talk about their experience of care in that way, and how a residential childcare environment is somehow more neutral or acceptable for them in some way. So in terms of the kind of some of the preferences that can exist, then that's one of the issues. Now, going back to the first part of your question, do you think orphan children would be more likely to form permanent attachments in a kinship care or in residential care? Rather than answer that completely specifically, I guess what I would, and again, this is a theme that will, for me, come up later when I'm talking about residential childcare alongside other forms of care, would be that I think what determines the success of placements is the appropriateness of the match and the quality of the care experience that's provided for the young people. So a good or an excellent care placement is a good, excellent care placement, regardless of whether it's in residential childcare, regardless of whether it's in foster care or kinship care. And the opposite is true. A poor placement experience, be it in any of those settings, is a poor placement experience. So I'm not sure that it's the nature of the placement or the type of placement that dictates the success. It's actually the quality of the placement and how appropriate a placement is for that young person, for their needs, for their wishes, for their desires. And there's that bit about matching young children and young people to placements. So where are young people most likely to flourish? Well, they're most likely to flourish in the placement that's appropriate for them. And that's a key part of the task for the professionals involved in terms of making sure that young people have got appropriate placements. So thanks for your question, Tim. Now, I'm just going to kind of hand over to my right here, because obviously we're going out live, and we've had a question come in live as well from Ron, who has posted this on the YouTube page. So obviously this is going to test me out, because other ones I've pulled off in advance and I know what's coming, whereas I'm reading this for the first time here. And so, Ron, you got a specific question here about some policy stuff that's been going on in Scotland. So we read out Ron's question, try and provide a wee bit of context for it, so that the question and what I'm about to say makes sense to everybody that's listening, regardless of where you are, because as is always the case on this course, and it's one of the really good things about the chat that happens in the comments. We've got participants and learners from literally all around the world, so we've got different contexts and people coming from different backgrounds, different practice norms, different legislation and policy. So what I'm going to talk about here is Scottish, but I think there's an applicability across the whole spectrum. So Ron asked the questions: what is the general public perception of the named person since it was introduced in Scotland? Now, I could actually do a whole session on talking about about some of the twists and turns of the Named Person Act in Scotland, and to kind of try and keep it quite tight and quite short. The Named Person policy as a policy that is attempted to be introduced in Scotland. It was piloted in some local authorities. It has proved hugely controversial, and it's become very political in a sense, in terms of being associated with the government, the SNP party, and actually you're just as likely to read a political analysis of it, talking about political parties, rather than actually the root of what it's about, in terms of the notion of trying to keep children safe, and trying to ensure that children don't fall between the cracks in the system. So some of the ideas that underpin the named person policy in Scotland is about that every young person, and when I say every young person, I mean every, not those just in the care system, about having a named person. That could be a social worker, it could be a health worker, it could be a teacher, it could be kind of notionally kind of any number of professionals, and the theory being that as young people grow and develop, that if there's always that named person, the system is looking after everybody, and the sense and the belief that young people are less likely to, and I've used the phrase there, fall through the cracks, because sadly, in some instances, especially when there's been inquiries into instances where things have went very wrong, and sometimes, and I guess specifically thinking about instances of young people in the community who have suffered either serious harm or have been murdered or died through other reasons, that whilst they were in some way visible to the system, they were equally invisible, and this allowed these circumstances to happen, and nobody took control of the case, and kind of things spiraled in the way that they did. So that's a very a kind of very short kind of notion of what the Named Person Act is about, and our policy is about in Scotland. Ron, in answer to your question, what is the general public perception? At the end of the day, I'm not entirely sure what the general public perception is. I can probably offer my answer the question more accurately, offer my own perception, which I think is that it has got so, the discussion about it in some quarters has got so political that some of the discussion is not actually about the policy as such, and it's certainly not about the sentiments that underpin the policy, because I don't think anybody would argue that it's a bad thing to try and have a system where we make sure, or we try and ensure as much as possible, that children don't fall between the cracks. We don't allow situations to occur where children can be visible but yet invisible, and be suffering harm and abuse and loss, and ultimately, in the most extreme cases, potentially lose their life, because the system doesn't do anything to respond. So I don't think anybody would argue with that in terms of a desire for children in society. Where we then get into the kind of some of the more kind of challenging discussions has been about the relationship between the state and families, in terms of kind of the notion of kind of surveillance and control, because some of the arguments against this is about, well, kind of all children become part of the system, and is this about the kind of state, in a sense, kind of overreaching its powers, and is it going beyond what we should be looking for? And then we quite quickly move from there, and some of the discussion just almost dissolves into kind of some of the political stuff that we see happening between political parties. And actually, for some people, I think there's a bit of a frustration there, that actually we should be talking about how do we create, in a Scottish context, how do we create the best country and conditions for young people to grow up and live in and feel and be safe and be nourished and be able to flourish, and some of the conversation gets pulled into other quarters, which I'm not sure is really driven by that desire. So it's a fascinating subject. I say that there's lots more that we could talk about that, and we could do a whole session just on that. So Ron, thanks for contacting with the question. Going back to another question that was posted, this was posted by Kirsten Watson. So Kirsten, thanks for your question. Kirsten actually posted this in relation to the live stream event that didn't happen 2 weeks ago. I didn't actually see the post until more recently, so I didn't respond to it on the page. So I was just going to take a chance to talk to it for a little bit. And Kirsten was kind of talking about certainly in a school setting, about some of the challenges that some of the staff can face in terms of what's deemed appropriate or not, in terms of relationships, touch, norms, and asking questions about how do we to form real relationships or connections with children and young people, and allow them to feel safe, claimed, nurtured, loved. And I'll talk more specifically about love as we move on. But how do we do that when, on the other hand, especially in school settings in the UK, we've got an awful lot of constraints and rules and boundaries about what teachers or other staff in school should be seen to be doing, what's appropriate or inappropriate in terms of boundaries. And it's Kirsten, I guess I don't think there is an easy answer to this question. And when talking about this issue of appropriate boundaries and appropriate professional roles, it's often in a school or an education setting that I hear and experience this getting voiced most, in terms of frustration about a number of the staff potentially feeling they would like to be able to do a bit more, but feeling constrained by the rules, the regulations, the professional norms, as what's seen as appropriate. And certainly there's lots of discussions about how those norms and boundaries have changed over time. And obviously some of the material that we've thought about in weeks 3 and 4 about risk, the notion of risk averse practice, you'll see the input from Ian Milligan talking about this, and there's some real issues and challenges for us there, not just in an education setting, but in childcare more generally as well, about how do we do some of this stuff. And you actually use the phrase about can some of the safeguarding stuff be viewed as a box ticking, and certainly I speak to lots of practitioners from a range of settings who experience or talk about frustration about policies that are claiming to be about looking after children and young people and keeping them safe, whereas another view is this is actually the organisation keeping itself safe, because if we just don't allow certain things to happen, then it means the theory being we're less likely to run into problems. So the notion here being that the way to eliminate unsafe touch is almost to regulate all touch and be it in a school setting or elsewhere. And I'm not convinced that the logic follows through, because unsafe touch will continue to happen, however we might define that. But meanwhile, what we're doing is we're perhaps eliminating the opportunities for some of the more caring or nurturing behaviour that, again, be it teaching staff or other staff may be engaged in. So it's a hugely challenging issue, but it relates to a number of the other things that I want to kind of pick up on as we go through the session. I'm just going to pause for a second and just take a quick drink so I don't lose my voice as I'm talking here. So kind of linked into that, kind of continuing this theme about kind of appropriate boundaries, appropriate behaviours for professionals, and what we can and can't do in terms of kind of the care that we try to provide to children and young people. In in week, I'm getting my weeks mixed up now, it would be in week 4, the Jenny Malloy material about love. It was there, and every time we run Caring for Vulnerable Children, we get lots of responses to Jenny's material. She's a fabulous speaker, talks very eloquently about her experience of growing up in the care system, and her ability now as an adult to reflect back on what was helpful and unhelpful and significant for her. And it raises lots of questions. And I pulled out just some different comments that people have posted, be it directly in relation to Jenny's material or with regards to just the theme of love more generally. So we've got a comment here from Cindy Van Drumel. So Cindy, thanks for your comment. And the reason I kind of picked that out because Cindy talks about we should all be aiming for children to feel that they're worth something, and how us as carers, whatever role that we're in, should be just about everything that we do with those children and young people should be communicating to them. You're special. You're worth something. Your opinions are worth listening to. I like spending time with you, and it's the combination of all of that actually communicate that transmits a feeling of being claimed, being loved to children and young people. And she finished by saying, I don't necessarily think there's a need to explicitly say love as long as they feel love, as long as they feel it. And that's an interesting point, and it's one that I have with students here at the university, be it social work students, residential childcare students, child and youth care worker students, all the different students that we work with when we talk about love. And I sometimes think that the conversation can get a bit hijacked by the use of the word. And Cindy, I think you make a really good point about in some ways I'm less concerned about the use of the word and the language we use, and I'm more concerned about how the entire care experience adds up to, and if young people feel truly claimed and truly feel or experience that the adults who are looking after them and caring for them absolutely care about them and see a worth in them and see a value in them, then that adds up to a better care experience. Equally, you could have somebody who is perhaps saying some of the right words, but is far more distant or standoffish. And I think young people there will experience a disconnect because because they're saying one thing, but what they're actually doing is another. So this notion of kind of how we actually are as practitioners and what that communicates to children and young people. And the relationship between that and the use of the word. So it's worth reflecting back. I always point to you, go back and listen to some of the things that Jenny was talking about. You know, it kind of makes me think of kind of some of the work that's going on in Scotland around about kind of care boundaries and love and such like, and some of the examples I see when speaking to young people, and they might say something like, kind of, my care worker loves me, or my kind of social worker loves me. And when asked, well, kind of, how do you know that? How do they communicate that? And some, especially for younger children, some of the answers can be something like, well, they take me to McDonald's, they got me a football on my birthday, or they remembered when it was a significant date for me because of something that happened, and we did something to mark that. So often the feedback from children and young people about kind of how they experience feeling loved is less. I'm not saying that obviously the use of language is hugely important and significant in all societies, but it's not just about that. It's and we're not going to solve this issue just by simply using some words or not. It's about that overall care experience. So Cindy, thanks for that comment. Now, kind of following on from that, there was a comment from Susie Patterson. So Susie, again, thanks for your comment. It's quite a long comment. I want to pull out one particular kind of part about it. It's talking about kind of how doing some of this in a foster care setting is hugely challenging. Absolutely, it's challenging in foster care setting, in kinship care setting, in residential childcare setting, in a range of settings. And you cite a particular kind of challenge that you think experience which rings a bell for me, and you talk about foster carers, and sometimes their experience of kind of thinking about what's in the best interest of the children that are looked after, and a sense that sometimes local authorities in Scotland been encouraged to return children to family placements, and sometimes the sense that kind of budget cuts are playing a part in that. And it's ringing a bell for me because every year when working with residential childcare students based here at the university, so this is people that are both in practice and coming in and accessing their courses, and sometimes they'll be talking about exactly the same thing about kind of young people that have been placed in their residential unit and been placed there obviously for a reason, and the young people are doing really well and flourishing, and kind of, I guess, a lot of the more problematic behaviours or issues or sometimes things that kind of led them to be placed in the first place are kind of settling down, and the staff are seeing positive progress. And sometimes that leads to the decision that, right, they're really settled down, they're doing a lot better now, right, that means we can remove them and take them back. And actually the staff that are working with them are kind of arguing completely the opposite, saying, well, actually the reason they're doing well is because they're here. And this notion that we've fixed them is a complete kind of fallacy. And one of the real concerns is if we now take them out of here, take them out of the conditions and the relationships and the situations where the positive development has happened, and we place them back to where they were before, wherever that might have been, and all the surrounding circumstances are the same, then we're worried that we're going to be back to square one. And sadly, in a number of cases, that is what happens. And so this notion that sometimes this feeling that children are being moved not for what's deemed to be in their best interests, but this notion of kind of budgets and finance kind of playing a part. So yeah, in that regard, I would agree with you, Susie. I hear that being expressed by other professionals also at times, and I think there's a real challenge for us then in terms of us continuing to advocate and argue as strongly as we can for children to be kept in the correct placements for the correct reasons, and to try and move away from this notion that children are somehow fixed and then we can move them back, and because that's cheaper. So thanks for the comment. And there was another comment by Alessandra Kennedy. So Alessandra, thanks for your comment. And then it was a response to Jenny's material, and you said one thing in it, and you said, I've been thinking about residential care as opposed to a family setting, and you say I can see for lots of reasons for it, but I must admit I still prefer it to be a considered option rather than a first choice. I would be exactly the same. I'm something about all my practice background is in residential childcare. I worked in residential childcare for over 10 years before I moved to the university, and I would still consider myself a residential childcare worker at heart. But I would never argue that residential childcare should be the first choice placement for all children. Far from it. Residential childcare will only be an appropriate placement, I would argue, for a smaller number of children. But I think kind of one of the problems that we've had in Scotland and the UK, and well, absolutely in Scotland and the UK, but in other parts of the world also, is that residential childcare, historically there's been and arguably currently still a bit of a bias against it, and it's often not used, as the phrase I would use, as a placement, a positive choice. And what I mean by that is, if I take a kind of Scottish context, if we've got a young person who is experiencing a range of difficulties and it's deemed that it's no longer safe or appropriate for them to stay in the family home, when we're exploring the various options that we might use for alternative care, what we should not be doing is, right, we're going to try everything else and we'll only use residential childcare as a last resort. Because when that happens, what that turns into, and I can cite the example of one young person that I worked with in the last residential unit that I was in before I came to the university. And he came to us, I think he was 12 or 13. He had more than 50 foster placements by the time he came to us. So I just kind of try and compute that in terms of a young person who is in a situation where they're having to be removed from their family home because of concerns, dangers about kind of how their safety, about their growth, about their development, and the thinking that so wedded to the notion that a family placement is the best place for this young person, that by the time they come to a residential unit at the age of 13, more than 50 placements. And again, I still hear these stories too often from residential workers. So the notion that residential childcare should always be a first choice, no. But what we shouldn't be doing is, it should certainly not be the placement of last resort. And there was a really significant and pivotal piece of work carried out in Scotland in the early 1990s, a review of residential childcare by Angus Skinner, who was then the Chief Inspector for Social Work in Scotland. And the main message, the main recommendation from his report in the early 1990s was saying exactly that. Was saying that when we use residential childcare, we should be using it as a placement, a positive choice. And so at the point that a young person is deemed that they can no longer stay at home, when we're thinking about the various options that should be open to them, residential childcare should be there as one of the potential options alongside others. It shouldn't only be considered after we've tried other things and those have failed. I mean, going back to the young person I'm speaking about, can you begin to imagine that moving home that many times by the age of 13? Can you imagine the amount of loss, dislocation, hurt, trauma, and then we expect these young people to grow and develop and flourish and say, "Oh, that's fine now. You're settled," because who's going to trust that they're not going to be moved on again in a week or a month's time? Because if that's all you've ever known, so we've got a real challenge in terms of how we take that forward. And so, actually, just linking that on the page about residential childcare, I thought it really interesting that I'm a residential childcare practitioner and worker at heart. That's before I came to university. That's where my practice was, and there was a few comments that I guess I personally found quite challenging. Darryl, you made a comment saying that there should be an upper limit time spent in residential childcare. In the long term, it can create more problems than it solves. I guess my response to that would be that I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that. I would go back to the earlier point, is a good, appropriate matched placement, be it in residential care, foster care, kinship care, or any alternative arrangements. It's about matching children and their needs to what a placement can offer. That's what we should be dictated by. And the notion that being in a placement too long causes it to cause more problems than it solves. If it's the correct placement and it's offering what the child needs, then children should ideally be left there. And that links back to the earlier comment from Sue about us sometimes moving children on for the wrong reason. But Darryl, you weren't alone. There were a couple of other people, about Paulina and Derek. You both made comments about Paulina, you made a comment about your personal thoughts as it's better for children to be in a kind of family environment. Well, absolutely, often it is. But as I've said earlier, for other young people, for a variety of reasons, living in a family scenario is too challenging, it's too difficult, both for the children and the family, and alternative arrangements have to be found. And if that's the correct thing for that child at that time, then that's what we should be doing. And Derek, you talk about kind of, from what you've experienced about residential childcare units can be volatile places. Well, yes, they can be, but equally they can be very loving and nurturing and claiming and positive experiences for residential for many children in residential care. So and in the same way that foster placements can be very variable, or kinship placements can be very variable, in the same way that schools can be variable, and all sorts of services can be. So our challenge is about how we make these services as positive as possible. And then kind of one last question, Rebecca, Rebecca Law. So Rebecca, thanks for your comment. You asked, Is this for the benefit of the child or the local authority? And you posted that under the residential childcare page. I'm assuming that you're asking there the question, is the fact about residential childcare, is this for the benefit of the child or the local authority? We should be doing everything for the benefit of the child. I mean, I'm kind of, I realise I'm kind of repeating a theme here about placement decisions should be based on assessed need of the child and matching children to what placements can offer, and that's what should dictate the type of placement, the nature of the placement, and the duration of the placement also. A couple of last themes. Martin LH, you posted a comment about Scotland. It was in the context of touch and love and such like. You said Scotland's trying to promote this concept again, cuddling, healthy touch and love through the independent care review taking place. And I put a big star against it, saying, yeah, absolutely. And I would want to draw everybody's attention to that, whether you're in Scotland or not. We've got the independent care review going on in Scotland. It's doing what it says in the tin. It's reviewing our care system. It's a big piece of work. It's been ongoing for a couple of years now. It's due to continue through to the end of this year. But one of the things that's really significant about this review, and actually one of the taglines this review has, is it's a review like no other, because one of the work streams in it is love. And the care review is looking at how do we put love back into the care system. We want young people who grow up within the care system to experience and feel loved. They should not be any different to children grown up in other parts of society. And for me, that's a fabulous development, the fact that we're having this conversation. Because if you think about some of the other material that we've asked you to engage with, especially about risk aversion and risk averse practice, and sometime and arguably a belief that the boundaries, especially in a UK context in the 80s and the 90s, shifted too much to professional boundaries, professional distance, and risk-averse practice developing, where it's almost like childcare with gloves on, as opposed to forming real relationships and having meaningful interactions. And I've got a quote here from the independent care review. So the two people that are heading up the love strand in the care review, Joanna McCready and Rosie Moore, they go by the title of the Love Ambassadors. And what it says is the Love Ambassadors will continue this important conversation about love while learning about what love really means to infants, children and young people in care, and how to make sure their daily lives are filled with it. I would challenge anybody to argue against that's what we should be aiming for. And the notion that we can't provide that in the care system, I don't think we should be buying into. Yes, we've got to acknowledge it is potentially more difficult and more challenging because it's not the children's birth family. There's a different set of circumstances, and children in the care system are generally children in the care system for a reason. They bring with them a range of prior experiences, and they have often experienced loss, hurt, trauma, and that creates a number of challenges for the adults charged with caring for them about how they respond to that. But that does not mean we should be neglecting or putting aside our desire to ensure that young people experience this. So if you haven't looked at any of the material for the independent care review, I would strongly urge you to do so. So Martin, thanks for making that comment. And then kind of finally, it's all a kind of variation on a theme here, but we spoke about touch in week 3 a lot, and there's a huge amount of kind of comments there, and there's a couple that we've pinned up the top of the page that I really like, and I just want to draw the attention to Karen Skinner. And Karen, thanks for your comment, and also Holly Freitas. Holly, you replied to Karen's comment, and it was about both making the point about thinking about not necessarily forcing touch upon young people, but thinking about how we present that to them. And there's a really nice example in your comment there about kind of for young children and just about how we use, as opposed to saying sometimes, could we potentially say, rather than go and give somebody a hug, about people saying, can I get a hug? And actually young people being active participants within that, rather than us forcing young people to engage in behaviour, whether they feel comfortable with it or not. And the things you're talking about there feel very consistent with some of the philosophies, ideas and values that underpin the independent care review that's going on in Scotland just now. But I'm at the end of my time, so thank you to everybody who's posted all your comments across all 4 weeks of the course to date. If you get any responses to anything that I've said in this session, I would be really interested to read them on the page where the video will be posted. So please kind of comment away and keep the conversation going. And then we'll be back again at the same time in 2 weeks' time at the end of week 6 as we draw the course to an end and think about some of the main themes that have emerged over the course of the 6 weeks. But thanks for your participation so far, and hopefully see you again in 2 weeks' time. Thanks. Goodbye.